So in this clip, I'm literally watching a movie on Netflix while playing this build on the side, super casually, not dying at all, power leveling through one of the most efficient dungeons in the game, and also collecting decent amounts of loot while I'm at it. You can not only get incredibly tanky fairly easily, but this build also comes with easy self-healing options. You've got tons of damage and a huge AoE range, making this build mechanically very easy, almost face roll, and one that is extremely ideal for longer speed farming sessions, especially since you really don't tire out as much compared to other builds, and one that can be useful for multitasking. Even the pros are beginning to recognize the Lightning Storm Druid, as it has been promoted to the A tier of the speed farming tier list on max roll. And even when it comes to harder content like nightmare dungeons, you can still do quite well with appropriately leveled nightmare dungeons. For example, I can pretty easily do around tier 50s at my lowish level. And if you want to, you can even do a quick skill and gear swap, taking less than 15 seconds each, to be able to swap to a high single target damage tornado build. So in this video, I'm going to detail how exactly you can quickly and easily set up your very own speed farming Lightning Storm Druid build, so you can be sure that you'll have enough tankiness, sustain, resource generation, and damage to casually and actually very efficiently farm endgame content on World Tier 4. I will primarily cover the key concepts and benchmarks you need to hit to be able to comfortably do endgame content, including Hell Tides, Renown activities, dungeon speed farming, and even nightmare dungeons at a decent level. By the way, linked below in the description, I also have a character planner that you can check out with not only the skill build, but also the exact Paragon setup and gear setup. And with that, I have a much more in-depth video detailing all the skill choices, Paragon choices, all the gear specifics that you can check out as well. But again, for this video, I'll be going over the core concepts and important benchmarks to hit. Starting with the skill tree. So the skills are very self-explanatory. You're obviously going with Lightning Storm, Storm Strike as a generator, or Wind Shear if you prefer. You can then stack up defense with Cyclone Armor and Blood Howl, which by the way, you can also spam, especially while you're running and not dealing with enemies, to gain some additional spirit. Hurricane is also just there for slightly more damage and defense. You also want to hit up some of the nature damage and lightning related passives, and also the Envenom passive if you happen to have the Tempest Roar helmet, which converts your storm skills into werewolf skills. But if you don't, you would just forego that and also forego Grizzly Rage in favor of anything else nature and lightning damage related. And of course, the Earthen Might passive is pretty much a must-take, along with also putting on the offensive aspect, the Mighty Storms aspect, which is quite easy to get. If you don't yet have it, you can always go and gamble for gloves until you get it. And pretty much just this combination alone and building your gear around it will allow you to not only have much better spirit regeneration, but also much higher damage. Now, if you do happen to have Tempest Roar, you can use these aspects as well to further improve your storm casting while transformed into a dire werewolf. But if you don't, there are certainly some budget options that you can still use to fairly comfortably farm World Tier 4. Maybe not push to higher levels above like level 40 on Nightmare Dungeons, but still do a decent job with farming dungeons and monsters at and above your level, especially with how tanky you can still be. And first up, if you don't have Tempest Roar, one legendary power that you can consider is the Overcharged aspect, and another one is Lightning Dancer. These will both increase your AoE damage significantly, and I'm even at the point where I might consider a gear swap to these, even though I do have Tempest Roar, when I just want to do some mindless, super insane quick AoE on some weaker targets. Especially with Lightning Dancer, whenever you crit on your Lightning Storm, and this is not even a lucky hit, it's just straight up on every crit that you make with your Lightning Storm, you spawn 3 tiny bolts that each actually do respectable damage to enemies around your target. And these can really add up, especially with large groups, making it super quick and satisfying for you to obliterate especially weaker and even decently leveled monsters. One quick thing to note though with both of these aspects, and I'm not sure if this is a bug, but it's that the damage rolls themselves seem to be tied somewhat to your character level, and especially with the Overcharge aspect, there's actually a dungeon version of it. And despite dungeon rolls usually being the lowest roll, right? The percentage to proc will be the lowest at 10% when you imprint it from a dungeon, but the damage roll actually scales with your character level, as opposed to if you get the aspect to drop from an item, the damage on it will actually be fixed and not scale with your character level as you level up, making the dungeon power potentially be able to even surpass some of the drops you get at a lower level. It's just a weird quirk or bug that I thought you should know in case you didn't. And as for some other flex offensive legendary power options, especially if you don't have Tempest Roar, Night Howler's aspect is good, especially if you often play in a group for increased critical strike chance to your party. The aspect of Intercom is a pretty good one because it increases your damage while standing still. And as for your two-handed weapon, and by the way you want to go with an axe, I would recommend using Edgemaster, again if you don't have Tempest Roar, and if you do have Tempest Roar, the aspect of Retaliation is very strong. And now getting into defense as well as sustain, or in other words, lifesteal, this is arguably, in my opinion, a lot more important than your offense because you can generally have enough offensive power just scraping together some of the offensive aspects that I mentioned and just having a decent two-hander, whereas with enough defense though, you'll really be able to fully realize this chill, relax, not sweating much at all, super easy cruising through stuff, even semi-AFK playstyle. Because again, by setting things up this way, you'll not only be able to easily face tank most types of damage, but also be able to heal right up quite quickly. And starting with defensive legendary aspects, on your chest and your pants, or even your helm if you don't have Tempest Roar, you want to go with the Vigorous aspect, which reduces damage taken while as a werewolf. Again, if you have Tempest Roar. If not, you can go with Cyclonic Force and Mending Stone, which by the way also has you taking Earthen Borg instead of any ultimate because Cataclysm is quite weak. So if you don't take Grisly Rage as a result of not having Tempest Roar, I would say that Earthen Borg is better than having Cataclysm. But you can kind of play around with what you prefer between say Earthen Borg, even Blood Howl, some of the summons like the wolves if you want some meat shields, and so forth. And with that, for your most important defensive aspect, you definitely want Disobedience. There is a dungeon aspect for this, but I would of course recommend getting a drop for it because it can actually roll to a much higher percentage, right? This basically allows you to stack armor, and when you're attacking, increase your armor to exorbitant amounts, especially with ancestral gear. With their armor values, I can get up to like 80+% damage reduction when my armor is highly stacked up with just this legendary aspect, making it extremely powerful, especially since armor not only reduces physical damage in Diablo 4, but also elemental damage too. And besides these 2 to 3 defensive legendary aspects, you also want to go out of your way, especially to stack up reduced damage taken affixes, such as reduced damage taken from poisoned enemies if you have that poison synergy with Tempest Roar, or just reduced damage from distant enemies, close enemies. As many of these that you can stack will increase your survivability significantly. And also, plus maximum life is quite a valuable stat and rare stat that you can highly consider too, not just on your chest and pants, but also on helms and rings. And along with these, of course, what will keep you alive is healing from the Circle of Life passive in your skill tree. That's really all you need, while you can also take Masochistic on your Spirit Boon for double that healing. But I personally prefer the Energize passive for a bit more spirit generation, which might especially be good if you don't have Tempest Roar, but it's really up to your personal preference. By the way, this max roll guide detailing the entire skill tree, all the gearing choices best in slot gear, along with Paragon specifications, even with a gear swap option to Tornado using the exact same Paragon configuration, you can check out using the link below, along with a video that explains all of these, my Paragon choices, in-depth gear choices, and also a gameplay commentary going through a Nightmare Dungeon. So be sure to check out that video if you want some more in-depth explanations and commentary on this build and playstyle. But for the super quick condensed version of how to pilot this build, you basically can just spam your cooldown skills, perhaps besides Cyclone Armor and Hurricane, which only works on close enemies, right? But your Blood Howl you can certainly spam for additional spirit generation, especially since spirit doesn't decay. Obviously you can Storm Strike sometimes for some additional spirit generation, which by the way also has a passive that makes you even tankier. For your Lightning Storm, you can totally just hold it down and just go with this super relaxing, mindless playstyle. Just hold it down as it channels and becomes bigger, and basically it engulfs half your screen and obliterates hordes of enemies. But I actually learned of this fairly recently, but when facing a somewhat tougher single enemy like an end of dungeon boss, and to be fair, I don't think this really makes that big of a difference, especially since these bosses are relatively not that strong compared to the rest of each, say, Nightmare Dungeon. But what you can try doing is instead of letting Lightning Storm go to its full channel, which makes the range really large, which by the way works great for like large packs and world bosses with huge hitboxes, but with slightly smaller targets like these end of dungeon bosses, you can actually even limit the channel to 3 strikes. So each time the lightning strikes when you start casting your lightning storm, the number of strikes increases by 1, right? So you can actually get to 3 strikes. So you go 1, 2, 3 strikes and then stop casting. And then since you have a passive for Lightning Storm where the number of strikes doesn't fall off, you can just keep casting, interrupting it, casting, letting it strike once, interrupting it, while sustaining the 3 strikes and the smaller radius, which will be hypothetically somewhat stronger against single target enemies. But again, I don't think it really makes that big of a difference anyway. Plus, if you want, with my setup, you could even swap over to a tornado build on the fly really quickly to tackle the toughest challenges. Again, additional details for that, along with everything else about the build in depth, will be in the description box below, not only from the Max Rule character planner, but also my in-depth video. So be sure to check those out as well. And with that, thank you so much for watching my build guide on the lazy, super relaxed, chill Lightning Storm face roll build. Consider subscribing to my channel for more cutting edge videos, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace!